That's just who you are. You're like this disgusting lunch that doesn't smell good and looks weird, and people have already imposed these ideas on top of you.
This is Jenny Dorsey.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Dorsey. I'm a professional chef, writer, and the founder of a community think tank called Studio Atal. We essentially create different types of content and experiences at the heart of food, art, and social impact.
In 2018, Jenny kicked off a tasting menu dinner series. It had some of the elements of fine dining, experimental techniques, multiple courses, etc., but with a twist. Instead of trying to wow the guests and evoke emotions like nostalgia, the meal was all about making the guests uncomfortable.
So you get food served in this little lunchbox. And when you open it, there's a little name tag that says like the hello, my name is, and it just says that it's disgusting. It's composed of all of these ingredients that used to be seen as very low class or gross or other, and now has become more popular. Sea eels, garlic chive, which when I was a kid, I would eat garlic chive dumplings all the time. People were like, ew, they smell like farts. And now people are like, oh, let me tell you, garlic chive is like the secret to Chinese food. And so it's composed of all of these ingredients that used to be seen as very low class or gross or other, and now has become more popular. It is so frustrating to see that sort of weird gentrification process. The fact that you can have a choice in how you want to make your food and compose your plate is a privilege.
With the pandemic and the protests for racial justice in 2020 and 2021, we are seeing a reckoning in the US and likewise in the restaurant industry. These kinds of conversations have been happening for a long time, for those that knew where to find them. For those that are just now becoming aware of terms like equity, intersectionality, and privilege, it's time to put in the work and learn more about what it all means. You're listening to Copper and Heat, the podcast exploring the unspoken rules and traditions of restaurants. I'm Katie Osuna. This is Pre-Shift, our third season, getting you tips, tools, and resources to navigate the challenges of working in hospitality. In this pre-shift, we're talking about privilege and bias, what those words mean, how they play out in our lives, and what we can do to be better.
The whole idea was just how to explore privilege through food and explore different questions around privilege.
So Jenny took some of those concepts behind fine dining, like trying to elicit emotion in the guest, and flipped it on its head in order to explore privilege.
What are we always thinking about? We want the awe factor. We want the liquid nitrogen. We want the smoke. We want whatever the hell, thing that's cool right now. And so for me, it's always like, how do I get the feeling of discomfort and shock and like weirdness? How do I get that out in people? That sounds really weird, but that is what I'm thinking about. Like when I set this dish down, because they have to open this lunchbox and there's that name tag, like how do I make them feel immediately off center? How do I make them feel immediately uncomfortable? I think just giving people that pause is usually what I'm trying to go for, because in that space, assuming that you have the right mindset of you are there to ask questions versus get defensive and get mad at people, which we get those people as well, is like in that kind of space, you're like, oh, I'm uncomfortable. Why am I uncomfortable?
Privilege really is just about having an advantage, either used for one's own benefit, or it could be used for the detriment of others.
This is Dr. Erinn Tucker.
My name is Dr. Erinn Tucker. I am the faculty director and associate professor of the practice for the Global Hospitality Leadership Program at Georgetown University School of Continuing Studies. So that was a really long title. And I'm also the co-founder of DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia Black Restaurant Week. I went and got these degrees and I lived in these different places. I feel that even though with everything else that we can discuss from a marginalized perspective, I believe that I had the privilege and I had the freedom to be able to experience all these things. But then privilege, when it starts getting added into other categories, where are you using your privilege to hold back or to the detriment of another group? That's when, of course, it goes negative.
Take that one step further. I think a big part of privilege is being able to define things or decide things for yourself, like having autonomy over things that other people do not. And adjacent to that is privilege is like the things that you don't worry about on a daily basis. If you're not worrying about money, if you're not worrying about your immigration status. For example, I was born in China and immigrated here when I was 3. Long situation where they lost my green card application for 10 years and I could not reapply during that time. Literally just had to sit and like hope that they found it. And so because of that, like my green card process didn't start until they found my green card again. And then you have to wait to go get your citizenship and whatnot. So by the time I became a citizen like when I was like 20 or something. I don't remember what it was. Long story short is that I had a very annoying immigration process, not nearly as bad as many of asylum seekers. Like I was just on a weird, like kind of in limbo, but I still like lived safely here. I constantly had to take trips to the immigration office. Like every month I would have to go and like look for my green card or like go talk to them or go get my fingerprints taken yet again because they would constantly lose this stuff. I just don't know where it went. And yeah, so there were a lot of issues. And so I just remember during that period of time, I was always thinking about like moving around my schedule or like how would I get to the immigration office, because even after I could drive, I didn't have my own car. So then like my dad has to take the day off work to like drive me there, like, and it's always located kind of far away from city center. So it's like, so there was like all these random things, and I have not worried about that for 10 years. You know what I mean? Like I haven't thought about that for 10 years. And that's like, long story short, that is privilege. Like I didn't have to wake up worrying about that today.
Jenny's dinner series was all about getting people to reflect on the privilege in their life, and guests knew that going into the event. People went into it knowing what the purpose was, to be uncomfortable and to ask questions, and yet some still reacted in an angry way.
I think they do understand what the purpose of the dinner is, but it makes them feel so uncomfortable that they react negatively, because I do think in this country we are socialized to react to discomfort with anger as opposed to with vulnerability. And that ties into just toxic masculinity and how that's portrayed and the way that we portray what is powerful. I mean, my therapist has said a lot of interesting things about power over our time together. And something that she said is like, you know, when you're angry, you feel in control because, you know, instead of being sad or lost or whatever the primary feeling you're feeling, anger is a secondary emotion that you feel so that you can have some sort of protection. And so anyway, I try to, I guess, empathize with the people that react negatively, because I think it's at a fundamental level, it's a very discomforting experience, and they are feeling that and they don't know a healthy way to deal with it. So then the only option they feel safe in, you know, portraying is anger. A big misconception about privilege and why people are so defensive is that privilege, you know, nullifies like hard work somehow. Like if you have privilege and everything is easy for you, which is not true. I have a lot of privilege in that I was able to start my own businesses. I have flexibility in trying out these different unpaid internships in the food industry. That doesn't mean that they were easy, but it does mean that at least I even had access to do them and do them at the pace and at the timeline that I wanted. And so just being, I think, a little bit more empathetic to how privilege can affect you in different ways, and also recognizing, or I guess coming from a place that's not just like, well, I constantly have to defend myself because I feel like someone pointing out your privilege means that somehow you had it handed to you. Once you start on a defensive note, it's really hard to get anything done. So if people are able to like step back and recognize that having privilege is not a bad thing, it just is something you have to be aware of, and also something you can't change, right? So like something you just have to be aware of and work through.
So when I was working at, it was Jillian/Dave & Buster's, we were located in a big mall. But our policy as a business, and this was throughout the company, was that after 8 p.m. or 9 p.m., a dress code was enforced.
Here's Dr. Tucker again. The privileges that we have shape our experiences and how we view the world around us. And what comes out of that are biases. Bias
isn't what you are against. Bias is what you prefer. And therefore, your lens, the lens that you have, is a lens of what I'm comfortable with, not so much that what I'm against.
Bias comes in many different forms. A good example of this is dress codes in restaurants.
You couldn't wear athletic apparel like sweats. You couldn't wear sweats. And you couldn't wear sneakers. And so I started to get mail and back from some of the clients stating that people who were coming to the parties, they weren't allowed in because of the dress code. And it started happening a few times. And so we had a weekly managers meeting. So I brought this up at the weekly managers meeting. I said, we're getting complaints about how we're enforcing our dress code. And I noticed that it was a particular assistant general manager. That particular manager was in the meeting, and he expressed, he's like, yes, he's like, this particular, he says, I actually remember kind of that day. And this particular person was dressed and he had his a sweatsuit on and his sneakers, and, that's not part of the policy. So I said, can I just sort of talk with you about kind of what we mean by the difference between athletic wear and like stylish wear. And by far, I'm not like a style queen, but I'm very much aware of what's on trend. And so the general manager was like, okay, sure, no problem. You guys talk about it. Just come back and let me know. And so I said to him, I said, what's popular right now are these what's called velour sweatsuits. And so what a velour sweatsuit is it's a sweatsuit, yes, but it's not a sweatsuit you sweat in. It's not, you don't go to the gym, you don't go to the basketball court. It is a style statement. And it's not about it being athletic. It's a look. And so I kind of showed him some examples of that. I said, is this kind of what the guy was wearing? He was like, yeah. I was like, yeah. I said, that's not deemed to be, that's something like you're actually dressing up in. And so you have to we have to take that into sort of consideration with this, because when I talked to the client, they also said that there was somebody in there with, because also the policy included no boots. And they mentioned that, well, there was somebody in there with Timberlands on and boots and things such as that, and nobody stopped the people that were there, but they stopped my particular guest. And so I said, so we have a policy here where you're looking at a velour sweatsuit, where I'm kind of giving you some ideas that this is not really, it's not athletic wear, but then if we're going to enforce something like this, then there's the Timberland boots and things like that. And in the world of even Timberland, these are not boots that are like, these aren't Timberlands that you go and work on a construction site with. These are Timberlands that they're part of an overall stylish look. And so he said, so he just kind of looked at me after it was all, and he was just kind of brushed. He's like, okay, whatever.
So this could have gone a lot of different ways. When the AGM was made aware of his implicit personal bias, he could have ignored Dr. Tucker's concerns and continued to enforce the policy with racist bias. But instead, he learned from it.
And about a week later, he came back to me and he said, I see the difference. And he's like, now I know what you're talking about. If I handled him confrontationally and said, because I would come confrontation doesn't necessarily mean I would be wrong. But if I said, you know what, such and such, you're being racist because you have a problem with the black guy who's dressed this way, but you don't have a problem with this, white guy who's dressed with Timberlands. Like, I don't understand. So if I said something like that, it would have just been like, it would have gone completely to the left or to the right, right? It just wouldn't have, and not to say that would have necessarily been wrong, because it would have been my feelings, but what did I really want to get out of this?
Everyone has implicit bias, but it's not a static thing. Bias is learned through your experiences, so you can most definitely change them. It just requires a lot of work and a lot of practice.
You want to do consistent self kind of monitoring. A psychologist will call it self-monitoring. Wellness might call it meditation. Jesuits call it reflection. It's just, you want to be able to take time to breathe, recognize, yourself internally, chime in on what are some of the stressors that you're going through personally. Because a lot of times our lenses are determined by what we're going through before we feel the need to have to lash out at whatever the situation is. And then the other, avenue is that this is a very sly example after I go through those very formal kind of definitions, where I say, anytime there's an idea that pops into our mind, there's what's called the factor. I don't know how to spell factor, but you'll figure it out. So from the moment that something pops into your brain, a thought, it travels, right? It travels from your brain all the way to your mouth, right? And so while it's traveling, there's part of you that's going, well, I'm not sure how this person will... I guess I'll say it anyway. Yeah, if that is what's going on, then probably it's inappropriate. So you want to take the factor test, all right? When that thought is, I don't know how, generally it's not appropriate. If you have to begin a sentence with, I don't mean to offend you, but that means you're about to offend me, all right? That means it's probably inappropriate.
So I am multiracial. My father is Caucasian. My mother is Hispanic. I grew up in rural Idaho as a gay man of mixed race. And I think those two components certainly have shaped a lot of who I am as an individual and who I was in the professional sense.
This is Adan.
My name is Adan David Callsen, and I am a coach at One Stone in Boise, Idaho, and have roughly 20 years of experience in the restaurant and hospitality industry, spanning places like Las Vegas, Boise, Idaho, and all over the Pacific Northwest. It's tough. As a mixed race individual, I certainly have lighter skin. Most people would never expect that I was Mexican. So I think growing up, in high school, you'd hear people in the locker room spouting racial slurs or commenting to me like, oh, that X, Y, and Z, and things that they didn't know would really affect me because I've never identified and I didn't really make that super obvious. For the longest time, it was just hearing comments and processing them and never really acknowledging them for the sake of like trying to not cause like a ruffle or not like trying, for me, it was like, oh, I would just roll my eyes and get frustrated. And so I think for the longest time, that was a huge disservice that I did to my staff and team by not acknowledging and not tackling some of those things. And I think that's because I too was struggling with my identity and I hadn't always come to terms with who I was. To now it being so incredibly different, now I feel like I can't not say something. And so often now when I hear people saying stuff like that, I definitely think of it as a call in. So many people say, oh, you got to call somebody out when they're doing something. When things like that come about, I'm able to say, hey, listen, I heard what you said. I just wanted to let you know that this is how it made me feel. And I super don't think that's appropriate. And I'd love for you to like not use that language. And I'm open to hear like your thoughts and feelings, but know that that type of language or behavior is super not accepted in my presence, whether that be the restaurant that I manage or the restaurant that I own or in the school and workplace. I think just being really, really clear with people. And it takes a lot of patience and it's not always easy.
Like Adan is saying, communication is key. It is challenging to talk about issues of privilege and bias, but in order for the industry to move forward as a whole in these important areas, we need to make sure we're talking and listening to each other. This is just barely scratching the surface, just the 101 level of educating yourself on privilege, bias, and inclusion. So head over to our Instagram page and follow us. We'll be doing an IG Live with Jenny in the next couple weeks to answer some of your questions. Dr. Tucker, Jenny, and Adan are doing some really cool work, so please check them out.
Yeah, sure. You can find me on Instagram at Chef Jenny Dorsey, and you can find Studio Atao on Instagram as well at Studio Atao. Again, that's ATAO. In terms of resources, you can find lots of the things that we've written about over at the studio on the website. It's studioatao.org/resources-blog.
You can find me on Twitter at Erinn, ERINN Tucker, TUCKER, all one word. Connect with me also on LinkedIn. You can find DMV Black Restaurant Week at DMV BRW. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at DMVBRW, or you can reach out to us. We have a website, dmvbrw.com.
We're also linking to a bunch more resources about privilege and bias. Check out the show notes or our website, copperandheat.com, so you can dig in a little more. If you haven't already done it, hit the subscribe button in your podcast app. Then you can keep up with all of our new episode releases throughout this season. Even better, please share this with a friend. Pre-Shift, the third season of Copper and Heat, is produced by me, Katie Osuna. Our story editor is Rachel Palmer. Our sound engineer and composer is Ricardo Osuna. Thanks for listening.
Radishes, baby wipes, vinyl records, you name it. At Walmart, you can save on almost anything. Now you can save more time by making cash deposits and withdrawals right at checkout. $3.74 service fee and limits apply. Green Dot NMLS number 914924 and 908739.